Part 1. Mysteries of the Great Plains. Chapter 1. The Two Nations. In the backlash imagination, America is always in the state of a quasi-civil war. On one side are the unpretentious millions of authentic Americans. On the other stand the bookish, all-powerful liberals who run the country but are contemptuous of the tastes and beliefs of people who inhabit it. When the chairman of the Republican National Committee in 1992 announced to a national TV audience, "We are America, and those other people are not," he was merely giving a new and more blunt expression to the decades-old formula. Newt Gingrich's famous description of Democrats as the enemy of normal Americans was just one of more winning iteration of this well-worn theme. The current installment of this fantasy in the story of the two Americas, the symbolic division of the country that after the presidential election of 2000 captivated not only backlashers but a sizable chunk of pundit class. The idea found its inspiration in the map of the electoral results that year. There were vast stretches of inland red space. The networks were all used red to designate Republican victories, where people voted for George W. Bush, and those tiny blue coastal areas where people lived in big cities and voted for Al Gore. On the face of it, there was nothing really remarkable about these red and blue blocks, especially since in terms of the popular vote contest was essentially a tie. Still, many commentators divined the 2000 map a baleful cultural cleavage, a looming crisis over identity and values. This nation has merely appeared more divided than it does right now, moaned David Broder, the Washington Post pundit-in-chief, a story published a few days after the election. The two regions were more than mere voting blocs. They were complete psychological profiles, two different Americas at the loggerheads with each other. And these pundits knew, before election night was over and just by looking at the map, what those two Americas represented. Indeed, the explanation was ready to go before the election ever happened. The great dream of conservatives ever since the 30s has been a working class movement that for once takes their side of issues, that votes Republican and reverses the achievements of the working class movements of the past. The starkly divided red-blue map of 2000, they thought they saw it being realized. The old Democratic regions of the South and the Great Plains were on their team now, solid masses of uninterrupted red, while Democrats were restricted to the old line, blue blood states of the Northeast, along with the hedonist left coast. I do not want to minimize the change that this represents. Certain parts of the Midwest were once so reliably leftist that the historian Walter Prescott Webb, in his classic 1931 History of the Region, pointed to its persistent radicalism as one of the mysteries of the Great Plains. Today, the mystery is only heightened. It seems inconceivable that the Midwest was ever thought of as a radical place, as anything but the land of the bland, an easy, snoozing flyover. Readers in the 30s, on the other hand, would have known instantly what Webb was talking about, since so many of the great political upheavals of their part of the 20th century were launched from the territory west of the Ohio River. The region as I knew it is what gave the country socialists like Eugene Debs, fiery progressives like Robert La Follette, and practical unionists like Walter Reuther, that spawned the anarchist IWW and the cold and calculated UAW, and was periodically convulsed in gargantuan and often bloody industrial disputes. They might even have known that there were once socialist newspapers in Kansas and socialist voters in Oklahoma and socialist mayors in Milwaukee, and there were radical farmers across the region forever enlisting in militant agrarian organizations with names like the Farmers Alliance or the Farmer Labor Party, or the Nonpartisan League, or the Farm Holiday Association. And they would surely been aware that Social Security, the basic element of liberal welfare state, was largely a product of the Midwestern mind. Almost all of these associations have evaporated today, that the region's character has been altered so thoroughly, and that so much of the Midwest now regards the welfare state as an alien imposition, and that we have trouble even believing that there was a time when progressives were described with adjectives as fury rather than snooty, bossy, or wimpy, has to stand as one of the great reversals of American history. So when the electoral map of 2000 is compared to that of 1896, the year of the showdown between the great commoner, William Jenkins Bryan, and the voice of business, William McKinley, a remarkable inversion is indeed evident. Bryan was a Nebraskan, a leftist, and a fundamentalist Christian, an almost unimaginable combination today. And in 1896, he swept most of the country outside of the Northeast and Upper Midwest, which stood rock solid for industrial capitalism. George W. Bush's advisors loved to compare their man to McKinley, and armed with the electoral map of 2000 with the president's fans were able to envisage the great contest of 1896, refought with optimal results. The politics of McKinley, chosen by the Middle America of Bryan. From this one piece of evidence, the electoral map, the pundits simply veered off into authoritative-sounding cultural proclamation. Just by looking at the map, they reasoned, we could easily tell that George W. Bush was a choice of the plain people, the grassroots Americans who inhabited the place we know as the Heartland, a region of humility, guilelessness, and above all, the stout yeoman righteousness. The Democrats, on the other hand, were the party of the elite. Just by looking at the map, we could see that the liberals were sophisticated, wealthy, and materialistic, while the big cities blew themselves shamelessly. The land knew what it was about and went Republican, by margin in square miles 4-1. The attraction of such a scheme for conservatives was powerful and obvious. The red state narrative brought majoritarian legitimacy to a president who had actually lost the popular vote. It also allowed conservatives to present their views as a philosophy of a region that Americans, even sophisticated urban ones, traditionally venerate as a repository of national virtue, a place of plain speaking, and straight shooting. The red state-blue state divide also helped conservatives to perform one of their dearest rhetorical maneuvers, which we will call the Latte Labelle, the suggestion that liberals are identifiable by their tastes and consumer preferences, and that these tastes and preferences reveal the essential arrogance and foreignness of liberalism. While a more straightforward discussion of politics might begin by considering the economic interests that each party serves, the Latte Labelle insists that such interests are irrelevant. Instead, it's places that people live and things that they drink, eat, and drive are critical factors and clues that bring us to the truth. In particular, things that liberals are said to drink, eat, and drive, the Volvos, the imported cheese, and above all, the lattes. The red state, blue state idea appeared to many in the media to be a scientific validation of this familiar stereotype, and before long it was a standard element of media's pop sociology repertoire. The Two Americas idea became a hook for the manner of local think pieces. Blue Minnesota is only separated by one thin street from red Minnesota. But my, how different these two Minnesotas are. It provided an easy tool for contextualizing the small stories. Red Americans love a certain show in Vegas, but blue Americans don't. Or for spinning big stories. John Walker Lind, the American who fought for the Taliban, was from California and therefore a reflection of blue state values. And it has justified countless USA Today-style contemplations of who we Americans really are, meaning mainly investigations of the burning usual, what we Americans like to listen to, watch on TV, or buy at the supermarket. Red America, these stories typically imply, is a mysterious place whose thoughts and values are essentially foreign to society's masters, like the other America of the 60s or the forgotten men of the 30s. Its vast stretches are tragically ignored by the dominant class, that is, the people who write sitcoms and screenplays and stories and glossy magazines, all of whom, according to the conservative commentator Michael Barone, simply can't imagine living in such places, which is particularly unfair to them, impudent even, because Red America is in fact the real America. The part of the country where reside is a column of the Canadian National Post put it, the original values of America's founding. And since many of the pundits who were hailing the virtues of the red states, pundits remember, who were conservatives and who supported George W. Bush, actually physically lived in blue states that went for Gore, the rules of this idiotic game allowed them to present the Latte Labelle in the elevated language of confession. David Brooks, who has since made a career out of projecting the liberal stereotype out onto the map, took to the pages of the Atlantic magazine to admit that, on behalf of everyone who lives in the blue zone, that they are all snobs, toffs, wusses, ignore our muses, and utterly out of touch with authentic life of the people. We in the coastal metro blue areas read more books and attend more plays than anyone in the red heartland. We are more sophisticated and cosmopolitan. Just ask us about our alumni trips to China or Provence or our interest in Buddhism. But don't ask us, please, what life in Red America is like. We don't know. We don't know who Tim LaHaye or Jerry B. Jenkins are. We don't know what James Dobson says on his radio program, which is listened to by millions. We don't know about Reba and Travis. Very few of us know what goes on in Branson, Missouri, even though it has 7 million visitors a year, or could even name 5 NASCAR drivers. We don't know how to shoot or clean a rifle. We can't tell a military officer's rank by looking at his insignia. We don't know what soybeans look like when they're growing in a field. One is tempted to dismiss Brooks' grand generalizations by rattling off many ways which he gets it wrong, pointing out that the 3 top soybean producers, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota, are in fact blue states, or by listing many military bases located on the coast, or by noting when it came to build a NASCAR track in Kansas, the county that won the honor was one of the only 2 in the state that went for Gore. Average per capita income in the same lonely blue county, I might add, is $16,000, which places it well below canvas in the national averages, and far below what would be required for putting on of elitist or cosmopolitan airs of any kind. It's pretty much a waste of time, however, to catalog the contradictions and tautologies of the huge honking errors blowing round in media fury like this. The tools being used are blunt instruments of propaganda, not the precise metrics of sociology. Yet, as with all successful propaganda, the narrative does contain a grain of truth. We all know that there are many aspects of American life that are off culture's industry radar, that vast reaches of the country have gone from being liberal, if not radical, to being stoutly conservative, and that there is a small segment of the cosmopolitan upper middle class that considers itself socially enlightened, that knows nothing of fine points of hayseed India, that likes lattes and that opted for gore. But the Two Nations commentators showed no interest in examining the mysterious inversion of American politics in any systemic way. Their aim was to simply bolster the stereotypes using whatever tools were at hand. To cast the Democrats as a party of wealthy, pampered, arrogant elite that lives as far as it can from real Americans, and to represent Republicanism as the faith of the hard-working common people of the heartland, an expression of their unpretentious, all-American ways, just like country music and NASCAR. At this pursuit, they largely succeeded. By 2003, the conservative claim to the Midwest was so uncontested that Fox News launched a talk show dealing with the culture war outrage, and it was called simply Heartland. What characterizes the good people of Red America? Reading through the Two Americas literature is a little like watching a series of Frank Capra one-reelers explaining the principles of some turbocharged Boy Scout law. A Red Stater is humble. In fact, humility is, to reigning journalistic myth, the signature quality of Red America, just as one of the central themes of George W. Bush's presidential campaign. In Red America, the self is small, teaches David Brooks. People declare, in a million ways, I am normal. As evidence of this modesty, Brooks refers to the plain clothing that he saw residents wearing in a county of Pennsylvania that voted for Bush, in particular to the unremarkable brand names that he spotted on the locals' caps. The caps clearly indicate that the people of Red America enjoy trusting, untroubled relationships with Walmart, McDonald's. Ipso facto, they are humble. John Podhoretz, a former speechwriter for Bush the Elder, finds the same noble simplicity beneath every adjusto cap. Bush Red is a simpler place. He concludes after watching people play in Vegas, it's a land where people mourn the death of NASCAR champion Dale Earnhardt, root lustily for their teams, go to church, and find comfort in old-fashioned fertilities. When the Red Staters themselves get into the act composing lists of their own virtues, things get bad fast. How humble can you be when you're writing a 3,000-word essay claiming that all the known virtues of democracies are sitting right there with you at the word processor? This problem comes into blinding focus in a much reprinted Red State blast by the Missouri farmer Blake Hurst that was originally published in the American Enterprise magazine. He and his fellow Bush voters, Hurst stepped forward to tell the world, we're humble, 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 humble. Most Red Americans can't deconstruct postmodern literature, give proper orders to a nanny, pick out a cabaret with aftertones of licorice, or quote prices from the Abercrombie and Finch catalog. But we can raise great children, wire our own houses, make beautiful and delicious creations with our own two hands, talk casually and comfortably about God, repair a small engine, recognize good maple sugar tree, and tell you the histories of our towns and the hopes of our neighbors, shoot a gun and run a chainsaw without fear, calculate the bearing load of a roof, grow our own asparagus, and so on. On the blue side of the great virtue divide, Brooks reports, the self is more commonly large. This species of American can easily be identified in the field by their constant witty showing off. They think they're so damn smart. Podhoretz, a former Republican speechwriter, admits we blue staters cannot live without irony, by which he means mocking everything that crosses our path, because we foolishly believe that ideological and moral confusions are signs of a higher consciousness. Brooks, who has elsewhere ascribed the decline of the Democratic Party to its snobbery, mocks blue staters for eating at fancy restaurants and shopping in small pretentious stores instead of Walmart, retailer to real America. He actually finds a poll in which 43% of liberals confess that they like to show off, which he then tops with another poll with which 75% of liberals describe themselves as intellectuals. Such admissions in this company are tantamount to calling yourself a mind-twisting communist, which has, according to that Canadian columnist, precisely what liberals were, as one could plainly see from the famous electoral map. While humble red state people have been minding their own business for over the years, intellectuals educated at European universities were lapping up the poisonous teachings of Karl Marx, then returning to dominate our universities, where they have condemned America's values and indoctrinated generations of students with their collectivist ideals. Thus, the reason that liberals rallied to Al Gore was the opportunity to advance collectivism. Podhoretz, for his part, claims that liberals liked Al Gore because he was so witty. A red stater, meanwhile, is reverent. As we are repeatedly reminded after this election, red state people have a better relationship with God than the rest of us. They go to church regularly. They are observant, traditional-minded, moralistic, as in Michael Barone's formulation. Liberals of the coast, meanwhile, are said to be unobservant, liberal-minded, and relativistic. But don't worry, a red stater is courteous, kind, and cheerful. They may be religious, but they aren't at all pushy about it. The people David Brooks encountered in that one county in Pennsylvania declined to discuss abortion with him, from which he concludes that potentially controversial subjects are often played down throughout red America. Even the preachers he met, they were careful to respect the view of others. These fine people don't like public scolds. They are easygoing believers, not interested in taking you out on a culture war. Don't be frightened. A red stater is loyal. This is part of a country that fills armies' ranks and defends the flag against all comers. While the European-minded know-it-alls of Blue Land waited only a short time after 9/11 to commence blaming America for the tragedy, the story goes, sturdy red staters stepped forward unhesitantly to serve their country one more time. For Blake Hurst of Missouri, this special relationship with the military is both a matter of pride. Red America is never redder than our bloodiest battlefields. And a grievance. You know, the usual one. The one you saw in Rambo. The one where all the cowards of the coast stabbed the men of Red Land in the back during the Vietnam War. But above all, a red stater is a regular, down-home, working stiff, whereas a blue stater is always some sort of pretentious paper shuffler. The idea that the United States is two nations, defined by social rank and first articulated by the labor movement and the historical left. The agrarian radicals of the 1890s used the two nations image to distinguish between the producers and the parasites, or simply the robbers and the robbed, as sockless Jerry Simpson, the leftist congressman from Kansas, liked to put it. The radical novelist John Dos Passos used the phrase to describe his disillusionment with the capitalist America in the 20s, while the Democratic presidential candidate John Edwards has recently made a point of reviving the term in its original meaning. For the most part, however, the way the two Americas image is used these days, it incorporates all the disillusionment, all the resentment, but none of the leftism. Rural America is pissed. A small-town Pennsylvania man told a reporter from Newsweek in 2001, explaining why he and his neighbors voted for George Bush. He said, These people are tired of moral decay. They're tired of everything being wonderful on Wall Street and terrible on Main Street. Let me repeat that. They're voting Republican in order to get even with Wall Street. This is not yet the place to try to sort out the tangled reasoning towards a hardworking citizen of an impoverished town to conclude that voting for George W. Bush is a way to strike a blow against big businesses. But it is important to remind ourselves of the context. During the decade that was then ending, the grand idea had made that the pundits gawk at and the airwaves sing that had been the coming of the new economy, a free market millennium in which physical work was as obsolete as a sundial. It was in the age of the knowledge worker, we were told, and the heroic entrepreneur who was building a weightless economy out of thin air. Blue-collar workers, meanwhile, were the ones who didn't get it, fast-fading relics of an outmoded and all-too-material past. Certain celebrated capitalist thinkers even declared, at the height of the boom, that blue-collars and white-collars had swapped moral positions, with workers now the parasites freeloading on the Olympian labors of management. The red state, blue state literature simply corrected this egregious excess of the previous decade, rediscovering the nobility of the average worker and reasserting that their original definitions of parasite and producer. What was novel was that it did so in the service of the very same free market policies that characterized the hallucinatory 90s. The actors had put away their laptops and donned overalls, but the play remained the same. Consider in this connection The Two Nations, story that appeared in American Handgunner, which tells us how the 9/11 terrorist attack brought home the truth to one self-described blue American in New York City, as she stood alongside other New York intellectuals watching the construction workers and firefighters do their job. She realized that those tired men and women passing in trucks made it all happen. They are the ones who do the actual work of running the country. They cause the electricity to flow, the schools to be built, the criminals to be arrested, and society to run seamlessly. She realized, within a blazing bright light bulb of awareness flashing in her mind, she did not know how to change a tire, grow tomatoes, or where electricity comes from. This deratiated white-collar worker cast her mind back over her power lunches and other pretentious doing and suddenly understood that she had no real skills. No light bulb flashes to remind her that the rescue and construction workers were also from a blue state and probably voted for Gore. Instead, we were told, she has become a humbler person, a red stater attitude if not in the place of residence. The tale then ends with the exhortation to get out there and vote. Blake Hurst, the Missouri farmer who is so proud of being humble, also chimes in on this theme, pointing out in the American enterprise that the work we red staters do can be measured in bushels, pounds, shingles nailed, and bricks laid, rather than fussy judgments that make up office employee reviews. But there's something fishy about Hurst's claim to the mantle of workers righteous, something beyond the immediate fishiness of a magazine ordinarily given to assailing unions and saluting Dow Now printing such fervent celebration of the blue-collar life. Just being familiar with the physical world shouldn't automatically make you a member of the beaten-down producer class any more than it does living in a state that voted for George W. Bush. Indeed, elsewhere Hurst describes himself not as a simple farmer, but as a co-owner of a family business overseeing the labors of a number of employees whom, he confides, he and his family don't pay high wages. Hurst has even written an essay on the timeless lament of the boss, the unbelievable laziness of workers today. This man may live in the sticks, but he is about as much blue-collar toiler as Al Gore is himself. Perhaps that's why Hurst is so certain that while there's obviously a work-related divide between the two Americas, separating them into Hurst's humble producer America and the liberals' conceited parasite America isn't the scary divide that Dos Passos wrote about. The sort of divide between workers and bosses might cause problems for the readers of the American Enterprise. Class consciousness isn't a problem in Red America, he assures them. People are perfectly happy to be slightly overweight and a little underpaid. David Brooks even goes further, concluding that from his fieldwork in Red America that the standard notion of the class is flawed, thinking about class in terms of hierarchy, where some people occupy more exalted positions than others, he writes, is Marxist and presumably illegitimate. The correct model, he suggests, is a high school cafeteria, segmented into self-chosen taste clusters like nerds, jocks, punch, bikers, techies, druggies, and god squatters, and so on. The jocks knew there would always be nerds, and the nerds knew there would always be jocks, he writes. It's just the way life is. We choose where we want to sit, and whom we want to mimic, and what class we want to belong to, the same way we choose hairstyles, TV shows, or extracurricular activities. We are all free agents of this non-coercive class system, and Brooks eventually concludes that worrying about problems faced by workers is yet another diluted affectation of the blue state rich. As a description of the way society works, this is preposterous. Even by high school, most of us know that we won't be able to choose our station in life by the way we choose soda pop or even the way we choose our friends. But as a clue into our deepest predilections of the backlash mind, Brooks' scheme is a revelation. What divides Americans is authenticity, not something hard and ugly like economics. While liberals commit endless acts of hubris, sucking down lattes, driving ostentatious European cars, and trying to reform the world, the humble people of the red states go about their unpretentious business, eating down-home foods, vacationing in the Ozarks, whistling while they work, feeling comfortable about who they are, and knowing they are secure under the watch of George W. Bush, a man they love as one of their own.